These are the blunders from down thunder that made Australia great.
If you're planning to escape from one of the remotest prisons on Earth, you need to be particularly careful with your planning. You need to be highly resourceful. And, as the hero of today's story found out to his cost, you need to be careful about who you invite to escape with you.
Welcome to this episode of Bungle Down Under, laughable lessons from the past, in which we talk about dumb decisions from the past which have helped make Australia great. I'm Josh McGrath.
And I'm John Gibbs, and today's hero is Thomas Cox, an inmate in a prison in the remotest part of Tasmania, reserved for the most hardened criminals.
So who was Thomas Cox?
Thomas Cox was born in about 1802 in England. At the age of 16 or 17, he was sentenced to transportation for 7 years to Tasmania. The nature of his crime is not recorded, but he arrived at Hobart in January 1820.
So how did Thomas Cox get to Sarah Island?
After keeping a clean slate for a couple of years, his behaviour deteriorated, and he committed several minor offences involving refusal to obey orders, assault, aiding an escapee, and escaping from jail. So he was given 50 lashes and sent to Sarah Island to serve out the remainder of his sentence. He was just 21 years of age.
As an inmate at Sarah Island, what were the conditions like?
Well, Sarah Island was one of the harshest prisons ever created. To reach it, you had to sail through the entrance of Macquarie Harbour, which was a wild, shallow and dangerous channel, which became known as Hell's Gates. So you had to get through Hell's Gates to get to this prison. Imagine how terrifying that was. The prisoners were employed in cutting down Huon pine trees, some of which were more than 2,000 years old, and they were used in shipbuilding.
So let's say you were planning to escape. What were the options?
There were two options. You could escape by sea, or you could attempt to escape by land through the impenetrable forests.
When Thomas arrived at Sarah Island, had anyone previously escaped before?
There had been two parties that had attempted to escape. Both consisted of 8 people. The first party of 8 people had attempted to escape through the forests, and they had all perished. Even the soldiers who were sent to capture them had perished as well. So escaping through the impenetrable forest didn't seem like a good idea. A second group of 8 prisoners had also attempted to escape. Their cunning plan for escaping had been to seize and steal a boat and escape that way. However, that hadn't worked out, and so they had also subsequently attempted to escape through the forest without having done any planning for it. And of those, 7 had perished. One, however, had survived. His name was Alexander Pearce. He'd been on the run for 100 days, more than 100 days, before he was recaptured. And so he was a bit of a hero when he got sent back to Macquarie Harbour.
So what actually happened during Alexander Pearce's first escape?
This is where it gets a bit dodgy. So the 8 of them had escaped from Sarah Island. They hadn't made much in the way of preparations. They got into the impenetrable forest. They were going for 15 days without any food. They started looking at each other and thinking, we've got to do something to survive here. So one bright lad decided, it's time to draw straws. Whoever draws a short straw is going to be killed, and we're going to eat them. 3 of the guys weren't very happy with this particular idea, so they ran away from the group and attempted to go back to Macquarie Harbour, to Sarah Island. They were, those three, one of them died on the way of hunger and exhaustion, and 2 of them made it back but they were really done in by the time they made it back, and within a couple of weeks after making it back, they also died. So that left 5 of them on the run. The one who drew the short straw was Thomas Bodnam, and he was seized by his fellow escapees and done in, and then chopped up and eaten. Sadly, one miserable human doesn't last for very long, and so there were 4 left, and it came time to decide who was going to be next. They picked another one called Mather, and he got the chop, and he got eaten. Then after that, there were 3 left. One of them got bitten by a tiger snake. His name was Travers, and he started limping along and holding the others up. And so they decided it was time for him to go. He got the chop and he got eaten. Now there's just 2 of them left, named Greenhill and Pierce. And Greenhill, and so it became kind of a game of Survivor or something like that. And Greenhill was the first to fall asleep. And so Pierce sunk the axe in, and Greenhill was no more. Sometime after polishing off Greenhill, Pierce made it through to, not quite civilization, but he made it through to a camp in central Tasmania. So he'd actually got through the impenetrable forest, and he met up with some thieves who he actually knew. They were sheep thieves, and he joined up with the sheep stealing gang. And then sometime after that, the sheep stealing gang got nabbed by the cops, and Pierce got sent back to Macquarie Island.
So what preparations did Thomas make for his escape?
Thomas gathered together some survival equipment consisting of some fishhooks, a knife, and some tinder for making fires. His strategy was, instead of trying to get through the impenetrable forest to the west, he thought that it would be good to head north, staying a bit more along the coast. But he wanted Pierce to go with him. Pierce was the experienced escapee, the hero of the previous one. He knew how to survive, and so that was what Thomas wanted to do.
And how keen was Pierce to go with Thomas?
Pierce wasn't keen at all. He knew how difficult the last escape had been, and he didn't really want to do that again. However, there came a day when someone had stolen one of his shirts, and he was about to be whipped for carelessness. And so he finally gave in to Thomas's persistent nagging and decided to go with him.
And how long did their escape last?
It lasted for only about 12 days this time round. They made it up to King River, which wasn't terribly far. They had to hide a bit to keep away from the soldiers that were chasing them. But eventually, after 12 days, some soldiers noticed some smoke rising from a fire in the forest, and they came upon Pierce. Just Pierce, not Cox. And so they arrested him. At first, Pierce claimed that Thomas Cox had drowned. However, when they searched him, they found pieces of Cox in his pockets. So human flesh was what gave him away.
So what actually happened to Alexander Pierce in the end?
Alexander Pierce was taken to Hobart, where he made a full confession of his cannibalism. He was tried for murder and sentenced to death. His body was dissected, and his skull was sold to an American naturalist, and is now housed in a museum in Philadelphia.
So, what's the moral of this story?
The moral of the story is that if you're planning a prison break, you should take particular care to examine the references of your fellow escapees.